Professional wrestling is cool again. That is a phrase that I and everybody else in the wrestling community has been waiting to say for nearly 25 years. That is longer than I have been alive. And you would think now actually would not be the time for wrestling to re-enter the spotlight in entertainment. What with all the backstage drama, horrible allegations, and complete reshifting of structure in several major companies. But in the midst of all of that chaos, something happened that made wrestling so good again. The reason I believe why pro wrestling is cool again is because pro wrestling is finally pro wrestling again. But before we talk about what got us here, we first have to talk about where we were, all the way back to when wrestling was cool at first. The Attitude Era. So back in 1998, WWE and professional wrestling was at the top of the world in entertainment. Wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock took the cartoony age of the golden era of wrestling and brought more believability and reality into the company. No thanks to their main competition, WCW, beating them in the ratings when they were doing that exact thing. People look back really fondly at these times for many reasons. Crazy segments of Austin beating the hell out of Mr. McMahon, The Rock and his incredible promos, and sheer ability to have the entire building of people in the palm of his hands. And of course, the amazing moments that surround almost everyone in an insanely talented roster. From the main event, to the tag teams, to the women, all the way down the card. But I think the main reason why we love the Attitude Era so much was because we could believe in these wrestlers. We could believe the teams of TLC and their hunger to steal the show with their amazing matches. We could believe Trish Stratus and Lita and their want to put women's wrestling to a higher standard. And we could definitely believe the story of Steve Austin sticking it to his arrogant, stuck-up, and evil boss. And trust me, we'll get to that boss later. But everyone already knows about the Attitude Era. Everyone knows about the Monday Night Wars. Eventually, those wars would subside, and WCW would get bought out by WWE, and the two top stars would take their leave to pursue other passions, leaving WWE with no other option but to adapt and change. And strangely, instead of continuing down the path that was laid out by the Attitude Era, they instead went down pretty much the exact opposite direction, making it more child and family friendly, even changing Raw's age rating from TV 14 to TV PG in 2008. Now don't get me wrong, it's not like WWE was immediately terrible the second they made that change, quite the opposite. There were still incredibly beloved characters and stories in what is known now today as the Ruthless Aggression and PG eras. But over the coming years, those characters would just be mistreated and storylines would either just end in ways that weren't really satisfying to audiences in favor of twists that make us just not care as much, or in some cases would just drop off the face of the planet, never to be discussed again. And by the time of the mid-2010s, what would be known today as the reality era, which I say very loosely, superstars would be seen as being shoved in our faces, whether we liked it or not. And in most cases, we definitely did not like it. It was just sad, really. Seeing a show and community that was fueled on wrestlers that we could believe in and wanted to see win, just being completely dismantled and changed to something squeaky clean, and it just felt, well, fake. Now, wrestling fans absolutely hate the word fake. It's seen as an insult. It dredges up infuriating conversations with family members and friends that all tell us the exact same infuriating phrase.
Dude, you know that fake, right?
It's like saying that makes them think they're more clever than they actually are. But during the mid to late 2010s, yeah, wrestling just kind of felt fake. It didn't feel like wrestling, and hell, it kind of showed in the way that it was actually presented. WWE famously didn't even call themselves a wrestling company. What? You're telling me a company named World Wrestling Entertainment, a company making a television show about wrestlers in wrestling boots and wrestling tights, wrestling in a wrestling ring, didn't call what they do wrestling? No, they didn't. Instead, they preferred to call what they do not pro wrestling, but instead sports entertainment. Now, I'm gonna be honest here. I have been watching professional wrestling literally my entire life, ever since I was an actual baby. And I still have no idea what sports entertainment actually means. But whatever it was, it for sure was not professional wrestling. It just felt so corny, so pejorative, so fake. But there was still a place that wrestling fans could go to see some high-quality professional wrestling. And that place just so happened to get me back into the sport when everything else was down. NXT. Now, I may have only been watching it for a couple of years, never really experiencing their own golden age, nor have I really been keeping up with the latest storylines, but when I was watching it, man, NXT was something special. An absolutely stacked show filled with amazing talent, matches that brought me back into wrestling fully, all led by somebody I never thought would be so damn good in the creative chair, Triple H. I am not gonna call him Paul Levesque. But as amazing as the weekly shows actually were, the takeovers were the real cream of the crop. I would look forward to every single takeover for months at a time, because I knew whatever matches were going to be on that card, it was going to be something amazing. It was a beacon of hope for all wrestling fans, and more importantly, it was a sign that if we just wait, this could actually be how the main roster is made. Triple H is a member of the WWE board, and it could be that he will actually take the position of head of creative eventually. I guess all it's gotta take is a little nudge. Enter All Elite Wrestling. Marketed as an alternative for North American professional wrestling, and yeah, during its initial start, it was awesome. Seeing more adult themes and content like having the actual wrestlers bleeding on weekly wrestling programming was such a breath of fresh air for so many people. Seeing characters that felt like we weren't being patronized to. It was a show that, much like NXT and unlike Raw and SmackDown, it was a show and roster of people that we could actually believe in. Are you starting to get the picture here? And even though AEW is in a bit of a rough spot right now in terms of everything, really, at the time, it was still a very welcome show that put WWE kind of on their heels a little bit. But it still wasn't the tipping point. AEW was definitely a wake-up call for many people in the wrestling business, but there was still one more thing that had to be done to really make a change in WWE. And that is kind of the elephant in the room that I've been skirting across for some time now. We gotta talk about Vince. Ever since the golden era back in the 70s and 80s, wrestling has been under the ironclad grasp of the tyrannical businessman Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And if you think your crazy ex-girlfriend was a control freak, you have not met Vince. Everything in that company is checked by Vince. Whether it be the characters, the storylines, the promos, the policies, they ran the damn catering menu by Vince every week. And there are absolute horror stories of how prickly Vince can actually be. Things like not allowing people to sneeze around him, not because he's a germaphobe or anything, but because apparently you need to be in control. Not having your phone on in the gym, no nodding during conversations because he apparently hates yes men, which is probably the most ironic thing I've ever heard in my life. And during the Attitude Era, I mean, it was okay. You know, the stories were fun, the characters were amazing, the quality was never any higher, but man, we don't really talk about it, but I mean, for every Stone Cold Steve Austin, there was always around the corner, like a Beaver Cleavage, a Puke, the women's division in general. And when those top stars left, more and more of those tone-deaf, ridiculous, brain-dead stories just kept coming. Now, that might have something to do with another Vince in the WWE, but we're not going to talk about him. It was clear that a major problem that has been dragging down the company for years was actually the person at the top. But, I mean, it's not like he's gonna step down or anything. Everybody knows he's giving up power over his literal cold, dead body. There's nothing that can make him, like, actually voluntarily retire. Right?
We have major breaking news.
Uh-oh.
Vince McMahon accused of sex trafficking.
What?
By WWE staffer he paid to keep quiet.
Janelle Grant, a former staffer in WWE's legal and talent departments, has filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court against World Wrestling Entertainment, more commonly known as WWE.
And then he began sending sexually explicit pictures and videos of her to people inside the company, allegedly.
A May 2022 message said, "I'm the only one who owns you and controls who I want to fuck you."
Okay, yeah, on top of, all of that, Vince did the unthinkable and stepped down as chairman. On top of that, he actually combined the company with the UFC to create the major conglomerate TKO. And after that bombshell of both of those major events happening, the biggest change happened in WWE history. Triple H became head of WWE Creative. This was insane to hear as a fan. Finally, we may actually be getting the quality of Black and Gold era NXT onto the main roster. And it's not going to be an overnight thing, obviously, but eventually, yeah, we got some incredible characters and storylines. Gunther and his Intercontinental title reign, having banger after banger after banger match with Sheamus. Damage Control with Io Sky, Kairi Sane, Dakota Kai, and Asuka being honestly just some of the biggest dorks you'll ever see. The amazing treatment of all of the latest NXT call-ups like Braun Breaker, Ilya Dragunov, and especially Jade Cargill. The dropping of shitty old gimmicks and bringing back their older counterparts like my boy, Pete Dunne. And the biggest one of them all, by far, the fact that all of these changes made hell freeze over. All culminating in the main event storyline of the Bloodline, led by Roman Reigns against the ultimate babyface hero, Cody Rhodes, wanting to finish his story. And the reason why people have fallen back in love with these wrestlers now, not characters anymore, wrestlers, is because just like in the Attitude Era, just like NXT Black and Gold, and just like the beginning of AEW, these wrestlers had stories that you could believe in. You can finally believe in your heroes again. You can believe the story of Jey Uso and the want to step out of the shadows of his family and stand on his own 2 feet, be his own man, and have an entire arena following him. You can believe the story of L.A. Knight and the struggle of working for decades, being put in awful places at work, and finally getting his recognition, and we can admire his dedication and want him to succeed. And you can believe the story of Cody Rhodes wanting to make his family proud after being outcast and being labeled undesirable, to fundamentally changing the face of the industry, becoming undeniable, all in the hope of honoring a great man and a better father who was taken away from us. I definitely believe in that. So now we're here. in a new era. After the explosion of the Attitude Era, the fun of the Ruthless Aggression Era, and the fall during the PG and Reality Era, we find ourselves here in a time that WWE likes to call the Triple H Era, which is a pretty apt name for it, but myself and a lot of other people in the community lovingly call this new time the Renaissance Era. Because that's exactly what it is. A time of revival and renewed love for the art form of wrestling. The literal definition of a renaissance. And what an amazing time it is. And I know this video was mainly focused on the WWE, but trust me, there are still plenty of other wrestling companies out there, all of which are fantastic. AEW is starting to get good again. Ring of Honor has always been a really nice underground wrestling company. TNA is doing pretty well for themselves right now. New Japan is doing good. The independent scene is exploding. It's all just a really, really good time to be a professional wrestling fan. If you're just jumping in, trying to see what the hype is all about, we welcome you with open arms. And if you're a returning fan coming home for the first time in quite a long time, it's good to have you back home. Wrestling is back to being wrestling again. And I cannot wait to see what happens next.